Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for all of you for being here today. I hope that you can hear me. I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today. Apart from my academic research at Leiden University, I am also a Polish warrant officer, a law enforcement officer in Hellenic Police for the last 15 years. And this research, this ongoing research relates to my professional background as well, since during all these years I have been frequently attending trials of a Greek terrorist group as part of my duties. What I will always try to do while listening to these actors was to realize how they grasp their ideals and how they reflect in relation to them, and in general how they justify their actions. However, I was unable to realize how terrorists motivate themselves and reach the states when they want to actualize their ideals. Therefore, I decided to do all this research in order to bring in conversation my practical experience with people which have detached from the normal life, mostly criminals, to be honest, and also the current literature on terrorism, and see how they inform each other. As you can see on the screen, the question that I'm going to try to answer today, and in general in my research, is what motivates an agent to violently act upon their ideals. Today, I would like to demonstrate that current literature fails to highlight how morality, as I shall explain, determines the acting phase of the radicalization process. My presentation will be structured in this manner. First, I will go through the models that I was trained to approach terrorism in Hellenic Police. Then I will distinguish their apparent structure from their essential structure, and I reconstruct it. Then I will argue that both the standard and the non-standard accounts failed to solve the knowledge action problem. I will explain later what it consists of. And in the end, I will try to propose an account of how morality determines the radicalization process, and I will suggest the moral mediation account. So, to begin, in our days, governmental strategies against radicalization have been broadly divided into two theories. On the one hand, we have the Anglo-Saxon approach, according to which governmental strategies should pay attention to the behavior as such, treating terrorists as people just intending to break the law. So they generally disregard the ideologies. This means that, according to this approach, only police should be in charge, since it is a matter of law breaking, and terrorists are deemed as criminals. On the other side, it is the European approach that I was trying to follow, in which the governmental strategies aim at the intervention in the early stages in the spirit of prevention. Strategically, this approach suggests that law enforcement is not enough to handle radicalization, and the effort should go well beyond arresting perpetrators and uncovering plots. Ideally, the counterterrorism policy should aim at the intervention in the early stages of radicalization in general. This very idea presupposes the acceptance of the contagion model, you are probably aware of it, which approaches radicalization as a process which is spread from one infectious person, the radicalizer, to another vulnerable one, the radicalized, like an ideological disease. In my practical experience as a secret Polish warrant officer in Greece, I was trained in the European approach, as I have told you, specifically in the models that are included in this review, if you can see it, I think you can see that, and which includes generally these theories, these models. As these models and their related literature show, the mainstream view in the counter-radicalization policies in the European countries presuppose the extent of distinct steps which can be traced and identified. This division into steps cuts across various factors which are believed to impact this process. These factors include the psychological, social, biological, political, religious, and so forth factors. However, I would like to stress the psychological and the social accounts, since for me, they seek to explain the procedures before the terroristic act and the manner the agent has been motivated to do so. On the one hand, social explanations try to stick to their social orientation by omitting to explain the role of the subject, while the advocates of the psychosocial explanations fail to highlight how the intellect processes the stimuli received from the outside world. However, I would like to argue that despite the literature seemingly favor either the psychological or the social aspect, mostly the social to be honest, there is no contradiction between them because, to me, they complement each other. Essentially, I think that they say the same thing viewed from a different perspective, I mean the individual and the collective one. So I think that the standard account of terrorism should be deemed the psychosocial account. For example, in order to approach the social and psychological regarding the theories, one radicalized person highlights economical grievances, for example, as a motivating factor. This is a social orientation, while another person highlights the sense of unsafety and anxiety which follow the economical grievances as a motivating factor. However, I think that the procedure is the same for both of them. So, having made this clarification, I want to go answer further and approach the four-step process that I think that the standard accounts essentially follow. In order to do that and bring the basic structure to light, I think that we have to reconstruct the standard account. As you can see, this is, according to my reading, the first step of the radicalization process, that all the theories of the standard account and mostly of the non-standard account as well follow. This step relates to the step when an agent motivates themselves to commit to an abnormal ideal. I mean, normal is what society thinks. I mean, the mainstream, as you can probably think. Okay, in this first step, the current literature has stressed a plethora of features which make a person disaffiliate of the norms and the value of their society. However, for the purpose of this, my research and this presentation, I think that it is of less importance whether the one or the other factor plays a higher or a lower role during this process. I think what is important in this step is that there should be motivating factors in order to have a radicalization process. In case there were not motivating factors, people would remain in their normal lives and radicalization would be out of discussion. Most theories regard the next step to be the moment when an individual adopts new ideologies, narratives, norms, values, or identities. This is the words that are usually used in the literature. These people, when they reach this stage, they think that their ideals are the only able to cause a shift in reality. So they start thinking of themselves as distinct from all the other members of their society and think of all the other members of their society as deceived, since they cannot bear the fact that they think something different than the truth that they think they know, their ideals. So they isolate themselves and feel a level of conformed in the reality they have constructed in their head. People can remain in this state and not radicalize further and think of themselves as probably some illuminated people. However, there are occasions in which they feel the necessity to change the others, not to say to change the world. This is the moment when they take the path to action, which consists of a distinct step. This is the third step, in which relates to the motivation that people, the motivation that people take in order to realize their ideals. It is the step that relates closely to the acting phase. The current literature mostly highlights the participation in a group and some related motivating factors as the motivating forces that push someone to action. In this stage, people have no conviction yet that their ideals should be externalized. However, they feel more and more comfortable with this idea. They think that they belong to this chosen one, that they have the power and the call to change the reality. I think that in this step, the standard account encounters the most significant issues which, since hardly can any of its factors explain how we transit from the theory to practice. And then we have the last step, which is the fourth one. I mean, it's the acting phase, the commitment of violent act. The The starter account usually refers to it as the operational phase. It is the moment that people try to change the world. And it is a necessary step, since if it fails, there will be no terrorism at all. We need the acting phase. So the starter account mostly, either tacitly or explicitly, acknowledges this step as the culmination of the step process. To clarify these steps using an example, just think of an anarchist terrorist who goes to the first step when he thinks that her government is unjust, so she has to do something in order to change it. She goes to the next step when she thinks that a stateless society will solve the problem, probably thinking about anarchism in this case. Then she goes one step further in order to start motivating herself and do some probably peaceful activity or participating in a group. And then she reaches the last step when she commits the act, the violent act. The general idea behind this step 4 process is that there is a cognitive and a behavioral part, which are generally acknowledged in police manuals. The behavioral part exists after the cognitive one has taken place. And given the fact that there are 4 steps, I mean, apart from the S0, which is, I don't deem it as a step, there are 3 transitional steps between these steps. The first transitional step relates to the fact relates when agents commands from S0 to start motivating themselves to transit from something to nothing. This is the reason why I don't deem it as a transitional step, but mostly as a starting point. Then people start motivating themselves, and the current literature, as I told you before, uses some factors related which explain how we move from S1 to S2, which I deem as a first transitional step. I think that this step is generally acknowledged from current literature. Potentially, someone could argue that the one or the other factor plays a higher or lower role, as I told you before, but the fact is that we have some motivation which leads to the commitment to some ideal. Then the preparation for the act follow, which argue that the starter account failed to explain sufficiently, and this is where that I will focus next. Specifically, the starter account fails to explain how an agent who believes in an ideal goes one step further in order to resort to action. I mean, in general, from S2 to S4. The first transition, T2, exists when the agent starts thinking that knowing the answer is not enough, and she has to act upon her beliefs. The agent has the alternative to remain in S2. However, there are people that want to go one step further. In simple words, if you ask people about the problems in the world, almost everyone has an answer, but a little percentage seeks to change the world, and an even lower one uses violence in order to change the world. However, there are some people that think that violence is legitimate, and they can use it in order to solve the problems. Then the last transitional step comes, when the motivating process succeeds and they just commit a violent act. I mean, it is the acting phase, okay? So, moving from S2 to S4 is not a single process, since there is this possibility that some agent takes the second transitional step sufficiently and efficiently, but do not resort to violent act for several reasons. Probably do some protest or I don't know what, some participation in a group, and then realizes that action is not something that she wants to do. So this is how the process that I have reconstructed the starter account refer to. So the starter account, I think that explains sufficiently T1, and to some extent also T2. However, the problem arises with T3, since they have a faulty notion of motivation. They've essentially failed to explain what follows S3 in essence. So what they provide is a successive explanation, but they fail to explain how knowledge or ideals motivate action. I will refer to this problem as the knowledge-action problem of the starter account of terrorism. Although the knowledge action problem exists in all these theories, it does not exist in the same manner. There is theories, or a theory to be particular, that does not address this issue at all. There is the majority of these theories which give a wrong account, and it is one theory, Moghadam's case of terrorism, you are aware of it, I suppose, which gives an insufficient account. In particular, he acknowledges the existence of a new perception of reality, which agents have already acquired, and he pinpoints a step when they think that it should be realized. This transition is motivated by a new morality. It is the third step in his staircase theory. Nevertheless, in my view, Moghadam's attempt to stress the impact of morality on the advent of terrorism is insufficient, given that he does not offer an extensive analysis to describe how this morality creates this transition. So he fails to do so. Now we have a clear image of the starter account, and unfortunately they cannot give an answer to the knowledge action problem. So what happens with the non-starter accounts of terrorism? I think that the rest literature of radicalization also fails, since they essentially explain T1 and in some extent T2, but they fallaciously claim that explain T3 as well. So is there any theory that can give us an answer to this problem? I think the only promising one from the non-starter account is the Luprecht-Enal theory of 2010, which approaches the global jihad radicalization. They imagine two pyramids, and they combine them in order to show and explain the development between narratives and action regarding the radicalization process of Muslims. This is the first pyramid, the narrative pyramid, which consists of 4 differing narratives, which start from those who do not accept the global jihad narrative and reach those who feel a moral obligation to bring it forth. In particular, they say that there are Muslims who believe that there is an individual duty to support and participate in the defense of Islam. While the 3 first steps refer to attitudes towards global jihad in form of committing to this narrative, I mean S2, the second step of my process, in the last step they introduce a personal motivating factor to action. Then, Luprecht-Enal suggests the second pyramid, in which it explains the manner these agents realize their beliefs in global jihad. Starting from the innards, they go into the last step when they refer to terrorists. What is important is when they relate these 2 pyramids, and we can see clearly that the moral obligation here exists in this exact step, which, as we can see, it's total black, and it means that, according to this view, the personal moral obligation is mostly likely amongst terrorists. If we follow this pyramid and this explanation, it is obvious that there is an essential connection between morality and terrorism. So, does this theory solve the problem of the knowledge action problem? In spite of the fact that Luprecht-Enal and Moghadam as well go one step further and acknowledge the role of morality, I think that this theory fails because it fails to explain the content of moral obligation, and they cannot explain how it reinforces terrorism. So, in general, I think that they cannot solve the knowledge action problem as well. So, I want to propose a new theory, which starts from the point that morality plays a significant role to the transit from ideals to action. What I would like to suggest is the moral mediation account, which defines how we should think of morality in order to solve this knowledge action problem. In my view, the third transitional step consists of 2 sub-steps, and there is a crucial note which connects these 2 sub-steps, which is duty. I mean moral duty. Saying that there are 2 transitional sub-steps, I don't mean a chronological consequence. Okay, just think of them as, I don't know, just the 2 sides of the same coin, or the 2 layers of a page, or something like that. So it is not a causal consequence between them. In this presentation, I will try to approach the T3A. Unfortunately, I will not address the second substep because my research is still in progress. so I don't have still a firm account of this, just some spare thoughts. So, in order to approach T3a, the first transitional substep, I will make 3 observations. Okay, first, the Kantian transcendental unity of a perception subsumes the psychosocial account under a unified category which determines the commitment to ideals, okay, the second step. Then, pure reason entails the unification between its theoretical and its practical application, which describes some connection between theory and practice, knowledge and action, right? And then we have the third observation, according to which the duty-based moral theory captures how the practical application of pure reason leads agents to endorse the duty to realize their moral ideas. And in this manner, I think that we made the connection between S2 and S4. So it is the philosophical part of my presentation. So let's go to the first observation. Okay, the psychological and the social components of the psychosocial account that I introduced generally apply to the traditional epistemological dispute between the intellectual and the empirical in relation to the origin of knowledge. Given that none of them can give us a firm account of knowledge, I think that only a real psychosocial combination can define what motivates the second step, the commitment to ideals. Hence, an alternative explanation which unites this account is needed, one which defines how knowledge is structured through the categorical combination of both sense and understanding. And I argue that Kant provides us with the transcendental unity of a perception. According to Kant, as you probably know, the transcendental unity of a perception synthesizes the empirical self-consciousness under concepts through categories. And it is the second step, okay, the commitment to ideals. For example, when someone says, I think that fascism is the best political ideology, previously, a representation has been categorized in their intellect. Neither individual factors, say psychological, nor social factors, okay, nor their empirical combination can motivate an agent to commit to ideals. I argue that the psychosocial unity can only be achieved transcendentally and can give us a very good account about it. Then, having explained how the psychosocial unity leads to the second step, that is the knowledge of the rightness of an ideal, I have to extend the Kantian epistemology into practical application in order to define how pure reason creates a connection between knowledge and action. In particular, Kant argues that reason gives unity to the whole rational faculty, namely the theoretical as well the practical one, in a common principle. For example, let's say that the Aryan race is superior to all the others. Okay, this principle. The practical application of reason cannot stand unless we presuppose that pure reason forms transcendental ideas which constitute the theoretical a priori support of moral ideas. Moral actions are deemed those actions which derive from reason and free will, namely the rational will, to act for the sake of duty. Okay, this is the moral theory of Kant. So, we move to the third observation, which relates to the previous remarks, which relates the Kantian perception of moral duty to the terroristic act itself, which emerges out of reverence for the universal law. To act in accordance to the universal law happens when an action inspired by the categorical imperative and is motivated by a sense of duty. For example, a nationalist thinks of her actions as moral because she fairly follows the imperative of presenting or preserving or expanding or whatever her nation out of duty towards herself and not for the sake of any external outcome. I don't judge whether her idea is morally or logically right or wrong, okay? So probably it is not anyway. Thus, the Kantian self in its universality and its transcendentality is essentially what motivates our moral duty. But is this moral, I examined here the content of this moral obligation, but is this enough to cause the transition to action? How the problem of akrasia, the weakness of the will, be overcome? For sure, there are people who feel the duty to act in a certain manner and acknowledge this duty, but fail to do so. For example, stop smoking. So there is something more that we want. Furthermore, it is a more intense problem when it involves violence, the use of violence. So I argue that in order for an agent to overcome their natural inhibitory factors, mechanisms, and violently act upon their duty, she has to fulfill the second step of the moral mediation account, T3B, which I deem that solves the problem of akrasia. But given that my research is on progress, I will not address T3B now. However, I think that in order to approach this issue, I will probably have to look to the akrasia debate, which shows that we cannot assume that recognizing our own duty is enough to make us act upon it. I think that this duty acknowledgement should be coupled with some motivating force in order for the duty to be realized. I will probably have to go the route of the psychology of drives or some related notion, probably resentiment or something like that, in order to define the advent of the dynamics missing. Probably for the part on Kant, I will probably have to follow the course cards reading of Kant and highlight the role of identity and the preservation of the self-place. And then this coupling with some motivating force will probably give the answer of how someone is pushed to realize their ideals. So following this line of thought, and although my research is on progress, I hope that I made manifest how and why the moral mediation account points to the solution of the knowledge action problem. I believe that the literature should not only pay attention to morality in order to assess whether an action is morally right or wrong. I believe that they also have to highlight the role of morality in the advent of the action and explain or define how morality relates to action itself. I hope that my theory does so, the moral mediation account, and I also hope that it will lead to further discussion, and I also hope that you enjoyed it, and this is it. Thank you.